Welcome everybody here or in the future on YouTube. So yes, as Eric said, this is about critical thinking, and I'm presenting this as if it's introduction class. All the topics that I'm going to talk about in this 50-minute or so presentation could be delved in by themselves in a separate presentation. And in the age of the pandemic and vaccines, I had to call it inoculating yourself against false beliefs. So the idea here is what you will learn from this lecture, hopefully will help inoculate yourself and prevent the false beliefs from infecting you, or maybe remove some that you already have. So, so my background, I recently retired from a career in aerospace engineering. I designed spacecraft and a bunch of other things I can't actually talk about because I had a secret clearance. 2016, I joined, as Eric mentioned, the guerrilla skepticism on Wikipedia, affectionately called GSAO, and became a skeptical activist. So I did a presentation for Red Bank about 3 years ago, I want to say, on that subject. And that's a really interesting project because what we do is we inject science and skepticism into Wikipedia articles and remove things like paranormal claims without any backing and alternative medicine things. And we even work on religious pages sometimes. Somewhat because of the work on that, in 2018, I was hired as a columnist for Skeptical Inquirer. And if you haven't heard of that, they bill themselves as the magazine of science and reason. So you can Google Skeptical Inquirer, my name, or the well-known skeptic, which is my column name, and you can find all my articles because most of them go on the website. They also have a subscription, printed magazine. But several of mine have been in the printed magazine, but mostly they go online. I've been a speaker at conferences on skeptical topics such as this one, including recently last month at DragonCon, and also twice at CFI's conference, which they call SciCon, which always gets held in Las Vegas. I'm part of the skeptical movement, which tries to educate people about science and scientific skepticism. And you can follow me on Facebook, either at the well-known skeptic or with that sort of weird acronym. And I post about our guerrilla skeptics articles that we publish on Wikipedia, also Skeptical Inquirer articles, and just general things. Of course, this year it's been a lot about vaccination stuff. So since I used the phrase critical thinking in the presentation title, I'll have to talk a little bit about what that means. So there's actually an organization called the National Council for Excellence in Critical Thinking. I had not heard of them until I researched this. And they have that rather long-winded definition, which I'm not going to read, but I kind of shortened it too. The objective analysis and evaluation of an issue, not influenced by personal feelings or opinions, done in order to reach a more accurate conclusion. I would say to get closer to the truth. Okay, so why is this topic important? Well, our brains evolved in Africa, right, well enough to allow our species to survive in the unforgiving environment, but our brain, which evolved to forestall death until we could raise offspring, isn't perfect. Evolution doesn't strive for perfection, it strives for good enough, right? We're primed to trust the opinions and anecdotes of those in our close circle and the pronouncements of people in authority. We believe things based on our own personal experience above evidence that says contrary. We have less than perfect memories, we have faulty logic, and we're all subjected to a host of cognitive biases. These tendencies can lead us to believe things which do not reflect reality. And often that leads to making bad decisions and personal harm, or sometimes societal harm. Understanding these fallibilities is really our only hope in overcoming some of the harmful impacts of these limitations that evolution has bestowed upon us. So the outline of the presentation is going to be two main sections with subsections. The first section is functional limitations of your brain. We're going to talk about sensory input errors, data handling limitations, and memory issues. If you think of your brain as a computer, right? The computer has a keyboard, it's got a mouse, it's got a video camera and an audio microphone, which might be recording data. So all of that is the sensory input structure, right? Then there's data handling limitations. Like there's only a certain DPI that the camera can handle. The keyboard can only type so fast, that sort of a thing. That's data handling limitations. Then there's memory issues. Once the data gets into the computer, what happens to it? How reliable is that memory? In a computer, it's pretty damn reliable. So now if you input this to the brain, sensory input errors are all of our senses. Data handling limitations are you can only take so much data at a time. And memory issues is, well, we'll talk about the details of that, but memory is not a perfect thing. So then the second large part is reasoning errors. Once all this data, as imperfect as it is in our brains, well, now how do we decide what to do with it, right? We have cognitive biases and we're all subject to fallacious reasoning. So we'll talk about those two things. All right, so let's get into the first part, functional limitations of your brain. So one important aspect of this subject is the fostering of a proper skepticism, right? It's understanding the limitations of perception and memory, essentially the functional limitations of your brain. And people generally understand that memory is imperfect, even if they don't really realize exactly how bad it is. We're going to talk about that. But they assume your senses, vision particularly, gives us an accurate view of the world around us, right? I know what I saw, something people always say. If you try to say, well, I don't think that was right. And, this first part really impacts how we see the world. So I like the matrix, and this really seems apropos to me. So let's watch this.
I don't hear it. I see it, but I don't hear it.
Ah, okay. Well, that's my goof. I got to start this again. So yes, there's a setting in Zoom that you have to do a special thing to make it share the volume, and I don't understand why that's not the default.
You have to keep pressing on that volume button every time for every video you introduce.
No, I've done this a number of times. As long as I click a little thing on the beginning when I share it, it works.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Sorry about that. All right, let's start again. Let me know, somebody, if you hear it now when it starts. Good.
This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back.
Oops. And I was trying to make my controls go away, and that screwed it up. Let's do that again.
This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
So that's your chance to stop watching, because I'll assume if you're still watching, you want the red pill and you want the truth. And we're going to see how deep the rabbit hole actually goes, to use the matrix metaphor. By the way, I'm going to write a strongly worded letter to Zoom. They really need to make the default that you could set it so that it always plays audio when you play a video, because I don't know why the hell it's the other way. That's just stupid. All right, Carl Sagan in this regard said, "For me, it is far better to grasp the universe as it really is than to persist in a delusion, however satisfying and reassuring." And one can apply that to a lot of things, but certainly to how we think we see the universe versus how it really is. And that's what we're going to talk about right now. So sensory input errors. We're going to concentrate on vision, because for most people, that's the primary way we see the universe, right? And the fact is, we don't see the world around us in full, or even as it really is. Human vision is unreliable. It's imperfect. Your eyes have flaws that you would never accept in a camera. You have a blind spot in your retina where your optic nerve exits the retina, and you see absolutely nothing in that portion of your vision. Well, why, looking around, don't you see that? Well, we'll talk about it. But it's actually much, much worse than that, right? In the rest of the retina, you only see high resolution in a tiny area. The whole rest of the retina really is not high resolution. If you stick your hand out and look at your thumbnail, at an arm's distance. That's 2 degrees of visual field. It's twice the width of your thumbnail at arm's length. About that is the only part of the world you're ever looking at that's in high resolution. That's a depiction of the eyeball with the fovea. That's the high res part, and that's it, a little blip there. If we show a graph of vision as good as it can get in your eye, which is a 1.0 on the vertical scale, you can see how quickly that drops off to near 0, going angularly around it, the eyeball in any direction. And there's the blind spot where you see absolutely nothing. Right? Also, the fovea is where your eye's color senses are. Outside of that little tiny 2 degrees, your vision is mostly grayscale. But again, you don't even notice that. How is that possible? And you know, the biological evidence of this to support the fovea, half the nerve fibers in the optic nerve carry information from that tiny little spot, while the remaining half carries from the entire rest of your retina. So in a nutshell, outside of the fovea, vision is very low res and mostly gray. You're effectively looking at the world through a tube and a paper towel, which is the only part that you see in sharp contrast and in full color. And you don't realize that fact. How could that possibly be, right? Well, the brain fools you into thinking everything is perfect in high res and full color. If a scene being, the way it fixes things is if a scene being observed is larger than can be resolved with a stare at a tiny little area, then the eye automatically, subconsciously is commanded by the brain to shift around. And you don't notice that happening either. And that your brain stitches all this stuff together, right? It fills that in, it fills in the blind spot, it assumes colors where you're actually not seeing them. And that's the view of the world that you see. Also, there's another effect that's a problem. You blink, and it's about 10% of the time that you're awake, but the brain edits out this repeated blackness, and you never even notice it. If you were to be watching a movie and every 10th frame went black, or say 1 second out of 10 went black, then it came back and it went black, you would notice it because your brain isn't accustomed to stitching that out. But for what's entering your brain from your eyes, it does that. So your brain, the visual cortex, combines all of this less than perfect information, and it constructs a broader view of the world. It presents you with a highly edited and manufactured reality that you don't know any difference from the perfect reality. But in actuality, it's just a model, which means it's an approximation of your environment, and it's good enough for you to get by. Also, it's another effect. There's a time lag between the light hitting your retina and being processed and understood by the brain, right? It's an electrochemical reaction that doesn't happen instantaneously. It's up to 100 milliseconds, and that's a quarter of the time that a pitcher in Major League Baseball might throw a fastball to the plate. So the reality that you're visually experiencing is actually behind actual reality. It's amazing that a batter can hit a ball under those circumstances. Never mind 100-mile-per-hour fastball. Also, if something is not seen clearly or for a long enough time to get an accurate image in your brain, or it's ambiguous to your brain gets confused, but it doesn't tell you it's confused. It shows you what it thinks it saw, right? This can lead to all sorts of perceptual errors, including optical illusions. And there are static optical illusions, and there are ones that are in motion. Here's a static one. The horizontal bright bars, right? It definitely looks like the one at top is longer, but as the lines which pop in there on this GIF show you, they're the same length. This is an interesting image. It looks like maybe it was done in a computer with a cube presented floating over a flat piece of paper. Here's another one with a rectangle floating over a flat piece of paper. But in reality, that's a flat piece of paper with this rectangular thing cut into it, right? But presented from the standpoint of looking at it down in a way where your brain expects to see perspective, it does see perspective, which is not there. And your brain can't tell the difference. Here's another interesting one. This has to do with contrast, right? This rectangular bar in the center. I see it very light on one side and very dark on the other side. But if you cut it and paste it out, it's the same color all along. But right, if you were to say, I saw something that was light on one side and dark on the other side, you would have no way of seeing this, of knowing that that was actually incorrect. Your brain is being fooled, and therefore it's fooling you. So I'm wondering if people see that move. I do. Most people do. Eric, seeing the image move?
I do. I do see it move, just like.
Yeah, so if you put your hand or fingers or something against it, so you're only looking towards a little piece of it, there's nothing moving. That is not a GIF. That is just a still image. And something is going wrong between your eyes and your brain to make it think it's moving. And here's another one. If you stare at the moon out the window in the middle, again, it's not a GIF. This is a static image, and your brain does not know that. It's telling you something is moving there. Similarly, a lot of people see something rotating in at least one or maybe all of these concentric rings. Again, nothing is actually moving, and this one, to me, works the best. I mean, I'm seeing the whole outer portion do some kind of weird rotation, and it's not at all. So all of those examples of your brain being fooled and telling you the wrong thing. And also, if all that isn't enough to convince you that your senses don't actually allow you to experience the real world, consider this. Our eyes only evolved to see red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet, right? Of the entire electromagnetic spectrum. Everything else is invisible, but it is just as real as that tiny portion of the universe that you can see. Here is a graph that shows the spectrum of EM radiation from small wavelengths to large wavelengths. And it actually goes off to infinity, at least on the right side. And that little bit in the middle is the only part that we've evolved to actually be able to view. All the rest of the stuff is just as real. Right? Some other animals can see portions of that we don't. Snakes see IR, bees see in ultraviolet. And here's a little document that I found online talking about the bees.
See, flowers sure look pretty to us, but bees see them in a completely different light, literally. Not only do they see the world through these compound eyes made of thousands of individual pixels, they see a world bathed in ultraviolet, way beyond what our eyes can see. We see this, and they see this. See, special pigments absorb the UV light, and they paint this big bullseye in the center of the flower, guiding the bee to the tasty nectar, and of course that sweet, sweet pollination. Now, the relationship between flowers and bees goes way beyond the visual. Scientists from the University of Bristol recently discovered that bees can sense a flower's electric field. Just like when you run across a carpet in your socks, bees build up a positive charge as they buzz through the air, and flowers are slightly negative. This helps pollen jump from the flower onto the bee like electric Velcro. And it also helps the bee figure out if another worker has already visited that flower and slurped up all the sweet goodness. Now, nobody knows quite how the bees sense that electric charge, but their fuzzy little bodies might be buzzing like your hair when you rub a balloon across it. Now, evolution's been playing matchmaker between bees and flowers for millions of years, resulting in one of nature's closest relationships. So next time you see a bee buzzing around the garden on a warm spring afternoon, imagine how their world looks, and think about how much of nature remains invisible unless you see it through the right pair of eyes.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting. They also touched on, essentially another sense that animal has, which is it registers static electricity, and its brain tells it something, which we don't do that at all. So no species' specific perception of the world is complete, or could be called the correct one, right? And even members of the same species with optimally functioning eyes, so you have perfect quote unquote vision, may not experience that visual reality exactly the same way. And what about extraterrestrial life, if there is such, right? They would have evolved in a totally different environment with maybe different radiation from a different type of star. This is an excerpt from a novel about first contact with aliens. And to the human who's talking, they seem to live in total darkness. And then he's contemplating why that would be.
But they don't need that. They don't need light. Well, hold on. Their visible spectrum might be completely different from ours. Humans only see a tiny fraction of all the wavelengths of light out there. We evolved to see the wavelengths that are most plentiful on Earth. Maybe Iridians evolved to see different wavelengths. The room could be well illuminated with infrared or ultraviolet light, and I wouldn't see a thing.
Very interesting. So probably most people have heard of Dressgate. If not by that name, they know what it is. There was a photograph of a dress that went viral about 6 years ago. And in fact, it has a Wikipedia article with the name The Dress. Right, viewers of the dress vehemently disagree about its colors. And it wasn't just a quirky thing. This phenomenon revealed differences in human color perception. And it's been the subject of ongoing scientific investigations into neuroscience, vision science, and there were a number of papers published in peer-reviewed scientific journals on this phenomenon. So what color is the dress? So for those of you who've seen it before or haven't, you can make your own judgment. What do you see, Eric?
So for me, it's black and blue.
Okay.
But I know for others, it's completely.
Well, don't say. So yeah, I'll show that. So black and blue. Okay. So, I'm actually color blind. I don't like that word. It's actually color challenged. I see color, but not as most people do. So I won't even hazard a guess. But so there was the first large scale scientific study of the dress was published in a scientific journal. 1,400 respondents found that. You said black and blue, right, Eric? So you're in the majority. But a significant minority saw it as white and gold, which is like, how is that possible? Others saw blue and brown, and 2% saw it as something other. That might be colorblind people like me. But the really interesting part is, what's the real answer? Well, the dress has no color. And this is like the most controversial statement probably of this section, because like people do not want to hear this. When you learn words when you're a kid, you learn tree and sky and mother and father, and then you learn blue and red and green, like those are real things, like everything else around you. But color is not a real thing, at least not like volume and weight and temperature and other real properties of matter that can be objectively measured, right? Color is quite literally a figment of your imagination. It's just a computation that your brain makes, which enables you to extract meaning from what you're seeing in the world. And as you saw with the dress, not every brain even computes what you see as the same, right? And this is from a neuroscientist. Color only exists in your head. There is such a thing as light. There is such a thing as energy, but there is no such thing as color. And you can Google the details of that at an article named "The Dress Isn't Blue or Gold Because Color Doesn't Exist" at pbs.org. I have had so many arguments on this subject. It gets tiring. So I've discussed a visual system, but other senses such as hearing also have limitations. Some animals' brains use means other than vision, right? We know about bats and cetaceans. They use echolocation to map the world. And they have an entirely different perception of reality than we do. Does a bat's brain map rough and smooth surface texture as red and blue and gold? Maybe. I mean, that may be what they perceive as colors. And again, not all members of one species agree in reality, even if your equipment is functioning perfectly. Remember Yanni versus Laurel.
Laurel, Laurel, Laurel.
People put in the chat what they heard there.
Laurel, Laurel, Laurel.
Interestingly, I played that when I was making this presentation, and my wife heard it from the other room, and she kept saying, "Why are you saying?" And it was the opposite thing from what I heard. So now, once all this information that's less than perfect by far is in your brain, then we can talk about the data handling. So your brain ignores much of well, basically this is how even that information has a hard time getting into your brain. Let's look at it that way, right? Your brain ignores much of what your eyes and other senses actually send it. This is a problem of attention limitations. Your processor, just like the CPU of a PC, can only go so fast. Your brain's got a certain ability to handle data being thrown at it. Your processor can only handle at a given rate. So what happens around you is largely ignored or not remembered. One thing I hear often is you don't feel your clothes on your skin. All of your skin can feel, but it doesn't, you're not constantly, oh, every bit of my body, I feel my clothes on it, because you go crazy. Your brain ignores it because it's not important. Unless something is a problem, then it brings it to your attention. Oh, this piece of clothing is rubbing my skin wrong, something like that. There's two well-known kinds of this. One is inattentional blindness. This is failure to observe visible objects in a scene. Again, we're going to be talking about vision here, but it applies to other senses. So regarding vision, it's the failure to observe visible objects in a scene when your attention is distracted, right? These objects are rendered effectively invisible to you. And there was a famous basketball passing counting study. And then there's something similar, but not exactly the same, called change blindness. This is a failure to notice changes in a scene as they happen right in front of you, right? Your brain doesn't see everything as equally important, and so it just ignores a lot of it. And if your brain ignores something, it's invisible to you.
Count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball.
Did everybody catch that? Put in the chat.
The correct answer is 16 passes. Did you spot the gorilla? For people who haven't seen or heard about a video like this before, about half miss the gorilla. If you knew about the gorilla, you probably saw it. But did you notice the curtain changing color or the player on the black team leaving the game?
I did not.
Let's rewind and watch it again.
Yeah, I knew about the gorilla, but so I saw the gorilla, but I missed those other
Here
things.
comes the gorilla, and there goes a player, and the curtain is changing from red to gold.
Put in the chat. Just tell me if you saw those
When you're
things.
looking for a gorilla, you often miss other unexpected events. And that's the monkey business illusion. Learn more about this illusion and the original gorilla experiment at theinvisiblegorilla.com.
So yeah, I found that fascinating because the gorilla thing went viral and I remember it. So of course I can never watch a video anyone like this would not see the gorilla, but I didn't see the other two things. So, all right, so now we have the, less than perfect data in your brain processed, not in full. So now the question is, how well does your brain remember things? Besides, I know what I saw as being a common refrain, I remember it like it was yesterday, or you can't tell me I'm wrong about what I remember. Yeah, so that's a common thing, and we're going to explore that. So the human memory is imperfect. It's unreliable. It's not an organic recording and playback system. Can you accurately remember what something you've seen numerous times looks like? You might want a piece of paper and pencil for this part, especially people who are going to watch this in video later and can pause it. Can you recall what a US dollar bill looks like? So that takes too long to draw, so I'm not going to pause this here, but a lot of people come up with something like that, right? How close is that to reality? Something that people handle, at least they used to before credit cards, all the time. Well, it's not really very close at all. Right? Besides the ones in the corner and some sort of an image of a person that they're looking the wrong way, everything else is wrong about it. Right? How about the Volkswagen emblem? All right, common vehicle, maybe you have one. What's the Volkswagen emblem look like? Well, this is a study of people who were asked that question. This is what they came up with. Very different from one another. And that's the emblem. I guess first column, second one down got it the closest. But some of them are just atrocious. How about Toyota? I have a Toyota, and I did this, and actually I couldn't remember. So this is what people came up with. Everything from a T to the word Toyota, to weird circles, to the peace symbol. And that's a Toyota emblem. And some of them are sort of there, but no one got it really right. So why is this? Why can't people get simple things like that right? Well, the brain retrieves bits of information from past experiences, like seeing something or experiencing something. It stitches those memories together. It fills in the gaps as best as possible, and there are a lot of gaps. And then it feeds a cohesive story to you, which is perceived by you as accurate and a reliable memory of reality, when largely it is not. There's a series I really like, and I can recommend, Brain Games. It's had 8 seasons on Nat Geo. I think it was renewed for a 9th, but I'm not sure. One very memorable episode had a group of volunteers who thought they were going into a building to take some tests. And they're standing on the sidewalk outside, might have been in New York. See, there's my memory is faulty. Waiting to go in the building, and a robbery takes place in front of them, and they all turn and watch it. Turns out it was staged, and that's the experiment. So they're brought inside the building to give their recollection of what they saw. And everyone is different, right? And one of the things I remember is the people who are most sure about what they're saying are the most wrong. And then part of that experiment, there was a plant. One of those people in the group, was part of the experiment. And when the people got together later to discuss it, the woman in the white dress, she had her pocketbook ripped off. And then the plant would go, no, it was a yellow dress. Really? Yeah, it was yellow. And that would convince some of the people who were sure it was white that it was yellow. From that point on, their memory was it was yellow. Another example is psychic readings. So I've talked about the harm in believing in psychics. So people come out of psychic readings and they misremember the details. They'll say, yeah, psychic was amazing, right on. She told me my uncle worked for UPS. But then if you play the recording back, which largely people don't get a recording, or if they do, they don't bother to play it back. What happened was the psychic said, I'm seeing somebody, might have been a male, and I'm not sure, but I think they have a uniform on, maybe Army or Navy or Marines. And then the sitter's thinking, oh, my uncle worked for UPS. He had a uniform. Yes, that's it. It's your uncle, and he worked for UPS. The person doesn't remember all that exchange. They just say, oh, the psychic was amazing. They knew my dead uncle worked for UPS. The work of Elizabeth Loftus is very important in this. She's a cognitive psychologist, and she's an expert on human memory. This is her Wikipedia article. Her whole career has been based on studying human memory and the problems with it. I had the good fortune to be able to interview her for a podcast called The Skeptic Zone, and here's an excerpt.
Just ran into Elizabeth Loftus, and she's going to be a speaker at the conference. Right now she's signing an autograph of witness for the defense for Ed Bear.
There you go.
And now I'm going to ask her.
Thanks for your help, Ed.
My pleasure. So thanks for doing this interview.
Oh, sure. I'm glad we could do it this conveniently.
What is your presentation going to be about?
Well, it's called The Fiction of Memory, and it's about research that I and other psychologists have done on how it is that people come to believe and remember that they did things or saw things that they didn't do or see. How do people develop false beliefs and false memories?
So does that include when someone maybe misremembers something, so there actually was an event, but they don't remember it properly?
Well, that's part of the work,
okay.
and many of the experiments that I've done show how easy it is to change people's memory for an event that they actually did see. But what's even more stunning is when we can plant an entire event in the minds of people for something that didn't happen.
Wow. Give me an example.
Well, make them believe that they were lost in a shopping mall and frightened and crying, or that they were attacked by an animal, or they witnessed a person being demonically possessed.
Yeah, one of the stories, as I recall, and maybe my memory is faulty, but it's something like, a person's family was asked to give the researchers family photographs of when the subject of the test was a child. And some of them they altered, and then the photographs are shown to the subject, who's an adult now, and say, can you talk about these things you did with your family when you were a child? And like one of them is totally made up, say they're, it's Photoshop to show the kid in a hot air balloon, with a mother and father. And they'll start, oh yeah, I vaguely remember that. And they'll start coming up with details about this hot air balloon trip, which they never took. And then they just believe it from that point on. And they can't tell that memory any different from a memory of a real thing they took with their family, like going to Disney World. So given all that science has revealed about how poorly we see, how poorly we remember ordinary things. It makes no sense to trust anyone's memory of what they remember as an extraordinary or supernatural event, decades ago, years ago, last month, or even a minute ago in some cases, right? As Sagan famously said, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And it should be obvious now that any claim based exclusively on human senses and memory does not come close to qualifying as extraordinary evidence for anything. And yet, I'm going to put some quotes up on here, and I'd like you to put in the chat, what do these all have in common? Why am I putting all these things up here? You recognize the connection, Eric? Sorry for putting you on the spot.
Like me to unmute other participants to let them?
Nah, it'll be too complicated to put them back,
Okay.
I think. But just, do you see the connection here? Why are all these things up here?
Not immediately.
Have you heard any of these?
I've heard all of them.
Okay, good. None of them are right. Every single one of those is not correct. But in almost every case, everyone thinks, if you said, hey, tell me a quote from Casablanca, it's played against that, right? Tell me what happened in the Snow White movie, Mirror, Mirror on the Wall, right? Hey, Lucy, you got some splaining to do. Sorry for the bad accent, right? Beam me up, Scotty. It was never said in Star Trek. Luke, I am your father. It was actually, no, I am your father. Even life is like a box of chocolates. That's not right. So it's
so even Mr. Rogers didn't say it's a beautiful day in the neighborhood?
So it's a beautiful day in this neighborhood, but no one remembers it that way. That's a minor change, but no one remembers this. It's always a beautiful day in the neighborhood. So these are connected to a thing called the Mandela effect. I'm going to talk about that a little bit now, right? What's the correct spelling of that? It's not a book series I read as a kid, but many people did, and they're absolutely sure it's one of those things versus the other. And the point of this Mandela effect is that people claim that these things were correct in a different universe, right? And the reason you remember them is because they were in a different universe, and the universe has changed. All of the movies and TV shows have changed so that they don't have these things exactly like this. And it's not that their memory is faulty, it's that the universe changed. And yes, that's a conspiracy theory that probably hundreds of thousands of people believe, rather than to believe people just remember things badly. Here's some images of that. It gets called out in the Mandela effect a lot, right? Does the Monopoly man have a monocle or not? Which one of those is correct? What's your recollection of that? Does Pikachu have a black stripe on his tail? Does Curious George have a tail at all? Right? These are things that the Mandela effect adherents believe is different in one universe than another. And the reason, if you Google it now and you find it one way, it's because, but they remember it differently, it's because their memory is correct, but the universe changed.
So are you saying that those specific examples, Pikachu and Curious George, are ones that have attracted a great deal of comment online?
That is correct.
Oh no, really?
Oh yes. Oh yes. Yeah, and the comments are made in groups such as this, the Mandela effect, with 52,000 members, right? If you're a scientific skeptic or whatever, and you go to a Facebook page, like me, you're lucky if you have 1,000. I actually have getting close to 10. I'm very happy about that, but 52,000. This is just one of the many Mandela effect groups. Who people, now not everyone in the group you believe, some are skeptics and question them about it, but I think the overwhelming majority believe it. So I went to one group yesterday and I posted this meeting. So like I said, there might be some people from that group here, right? And all he said was the Mandela effect will be discussed. So I got this response. I'm going to read it. Thanks for the warning. No doubt you'll attempt to install a measure of doubt in the minds of us who have experienced it. I'll believe my own lying eyes. And I didn't say, all I said was, it'll be discussed. Thank you very much. If that means I am self-deluded, so be it. I have nothing but contempt for skeptics who, because they cannot accept what is hard to believe, insist on attempting to force their limited belief systems on those of us who have experienced things and events that don't fit into their limited way of thinking. It's not that their memories are wrong. And these are books, many books on the subject. This is just a quick Google search. All right. So the third book there, Mind Beyond Matter, The Mandela Effect. This is one of the reviews. It's real. I've been on this journey. Yeah, it's a mind-blowing experience. So there are no doubt some what's called pose, people who just like, play act that they believe this stuff, but there are people who absolutely believe this. And the Simpsons writers are so good at being skeptical. So this was a little scene where, am I just misremembering? And there's, you can see some of the images of common things, the Bernstein Bears, Curious George, the spelling of Looney Tunes and Fruit Loops. Am I just misremembering? No, it's the universe, it's wrong. And this is what the Mandela Effect people have come to the conclusion. So what we tend to think.
And what is it about Nelson Mandela that they think is?
Yes, thank you for that question. So this started by someone who wrote a book after realizing that the universe had changed around her because she knows Nelson Mandela died in prison. And people said, no, he was released from prison and then became the president of South Africa. No, I remember the funeral, he died in prison. And then she started picking out all these other things. And she started, you can look this up on Google. Yep, and it just blew up from there. It wasn't that long ago. I want to say 10 years ago, maybe this started. But yeah, so it's been given the name the Mandela Effect. I actually saw a funny quote on one of the Facebook groups that said, in the future, this will be called the Mandalorian Effect. So I think that was a play on the Mandela Effect itself. So what we tend to think is that I know what I saw and I know what I remember, as exemplified in the Mandela Effect, right? And the reality is every act of perception is to some degree an act of creation, and every act of memory is to some degree an act of imagination. And that was from Oliver Sacks, who wrote a book named The Man, how did that go? The Man Who Thought, Who Couldn't Tell
The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat.
Thank you very much. I knew I was going to butcher that. And I think that
you,
he had a neurological problem, right? If I remember, he couldn't recognize a face or something.
Yes. That book was about a series of different phenomenon that occurred due to lesions in different parts of the brain. And Oliver Sacks just recounts all these different case studies. Yeah.
So that's somebody, regarding non-neurotypical people, but as what this presentation has talked about, even for neurotypical people, people with no mental problems, physical or otherwise, this statement is true. Right? Okay, so now we're going to talk about reasoning errors. So everything I've discussed before this point concerns physiological failings with the evolutionary design of the human body, right? These can't be fixed. The only thing we can do is understand the limitations when we make decisions about what we think and believe. But now I'm going to discuss things that you can change because they involve how you process the information that's in your brain, right? We're going to talk about reasoning, right? The thinking process is also less than perfect, but unlike the uncontrollable flaws we talked about before, you are at least partially in control how you process the problematic data, right? You can change or practice how you think and reason, but we need to understand the flaws in the reasoning before you can do this. And there's two large categories we're going to talk about in the final part of this presentation, right? Cognitive biases and logical fallacies, things we're all subjected to. So cognitive biases, what is that? Well, a cognitive bias is a heuristic. It's a shortcut in thinking, which influences how we make decisions about what to believe, right? The brain is impacted with so much information, a little bit like we talked about before, it can't absorb it all. So your brain has evolved shortcuts for thinking about everything. It can't think about every single thing from scratch every single time it's presented with data. So shortcuts are evolved in order to simplify the complex world. And biases may sometimes lead to perceptual distortions, inaccurate judgments, and illogical interpretations of what we would broadly call irrationality, right? Although these are unconscious biases, if we understand them, then we can sometimes train the mind to use a different pattern of thinking and somewhat mitigate their effects on our belief and behavior. The first one, I'd say the mother of all biases, confirmation bias, right? The tendency to search for, interpret, favor, recall information in a way that confirms or supports one's prior beliefs or values. You know, I mean, certainly saw that with the post from the person in the Mandela Effect group. You're not going to tell me otherwise. I already believe this. Everything I've seen, you know, points to this. Why would I listen to you? Disconfirming information is not sought. When it's come across or offered, ignore it, discount it without due consideration. Motivated reasoning, kind of connected. A lot of these are connected to each other. This is reasoning which produces beliefs, justifications, decisions that are desired rather than accurately reflect the evidence or situation, right? Part of the problem, I'm going to go back to that. Part of the problem with this one is once you're decided you believe something, and these days, if you're in an in-group, like you're a member of Facebook groups where everyone else believes like you do, if you change your mind, you're going to be out of that group. You'll be the out person anymore. You're the evil person who is the sheeple. So you're motivated to not change your mind. There's something called status quo bias, tendency to have a preference for the current state of affairs, right? The current baseline is taken as your reference point, and any change from the baseline is perceived as just being bad. That could be you for you or all society. It's a bandwagon effect, tendency for people to adopt behaviors, styles, or beliefs simply because others have them. And I would say in the age, again, of social media, when you can find groups of people that believe something incorrectly, and it's the same thing you believe incorrectly, you have more reason to stay on the bandwagon. And the rate of uptake of beliefs, ideas, fads, and trends increase with respect to the proportion of others who have them. One big place this is in flat Earth, right? Since social media came about and YouTube, more people believe that the Earth is not an oblate spheroid than used to, because they find groups of people who agree with them and they reinforce each other's opinions. And people want to fit in with their peers. Once you believe this, you're motivated to, not jump off the bandwagon, right? Interestingly, there's also the reverse bandwagon effect. This is a cognitive bias that causes people to avoid doing something or believing something because others do. Much less, used than the bandwagon effect, I would say, in use. Survivorship bias, I always found this one fascinating. It's a form of selection bias. It's a logical error of concentrating on the people or things that made it past some selection process, overlooking those that did not survive, right? Hey, everyone I've talked to has survived COVID. I've seen that online. This can lead to false conclusions in several different ways, including the belief that success of something is due to some special property rather than just random circumstances. One example would be thinking something is not as dangerous as it actually is because everyone you know who experienced the danger has survived, right? I don't personally know anybody who died in a car accident because they weren't wearing a seatbelt. Priming effect. This occurs when an individual's exposure to a certain stimulus influences their response to subsequent stimuli, so without any awareness of the connection at all. These are often related to words or images that people see during their day-to-day lives. One thing I could think of that seems to fall into this category would be people who speak in tongues, right? They join a church as a kid with their parents, the adults speak in tongues, and you're just seeing this as normal. And when you get to the age where it's expected of you, you're primed to do it, to think it's a normal thing to do, right? And unfortunately, completely avoiding this may be impossible given the way in we subconsciously process that information. But we can develop an awareness of how it affects us in the hope of mitigating its worst effects. Pareidolia. If people don't know that word, I think they would generally know that what it means, which is seeing patterns in things where the thing is there, but the pattern really is not what you're seeing. So, right, there are clouds, but what people see in this isn't really there, so to speak. But if you're, I would say, primed to believe in a certain way, you may in fact think that's a sign personally to you. This might be a sign that you like King Kong movies, because I see King Kong on the right side battling some kind of a other large creature. This is a fairly famous one. Have you ever had a topic on this whole subject, the whole Mars thing, Eric?
Not devoted to that.
Interestingly, I probably there are books written on this subject, so certainly someone could do a talk on it. But basically, when this was imaged in the 70s, this created a wild conspiracies of cities on Mars, and this is essentially a human face, and it was pointing at Earth, and the only reason that that could be on Mars is because they wanted us to see it. Other raised features in this area were, well, oh, this is clearly a collapsed building, and this is a stadium. I think there's a book called Cities on Mars. And then when we got there several decades later with higher res imaging and not the same sun angle, that's that same feature, right? I mean, not very close to a face. If you saw that first, no one would have thought twice about it. So some of the face-like features in the image on the left are from the sun angle, just coincidentally. Some of them are, so certainly in sort of the crater at the upper left became an eye and the mouth. The nose is just a pure artifact of a failure of the camera, because all those black dots all over this picture are pixels that were missing from the picture. One happened to be right where a nostril would be. So it just lent more credibility to that being a face. Let's get into the religious realm, right? This happens all the time. People see something on a piece of toast on the left, grilled cheese on the right, and it's not just a human face, it's a specific human face to them. And this is somebody making a little monetary gain from that. goldenpalace.com, Virgin Mary grilled cheese. Passion of the toast. I love it. I'm sure they sell artifacts of this. And I just can't help seeing something funny there. What do you see, Eric? Tell me. Tell me I'm not crazy.
It somewhat resembles like a cartoon baby chick.
There we go. It's a chick. I just got a chick church. It's like funny. And this is quite the other extreme. It's I can imagine somebody cutting that pepper open and not wanting to put any piece of that in their salad. So how do we overcome these kinds of biases? Well, you have to question what you accept as true, right? If you accept that the devil is sending you a signal, and that's why that looked like that, there's a problem there. You have to base your beliefs on facts, verify the data sources, avoid knee-jerk reactions to what you perceive, right? Keep an open mind, and check for alternate explanations and contrary opinions. We all hear about like our own bubbles these days, and that is true of everyone. Politically, regarding religion, people do not talk to people outside of what they already believe, and therefore they just keep believing it. So yes, check outside your echo chamber.
Yeah, just a quick story. I was traveling in South Jersey last weekend, and I saw a sign on someone's front lawn that read, "If you're looking for a sign, here it is."
I like that. Okay, the very last section is fallacious reasoning, right? We're going to talk about informal logical fallacies. This is how your brain uses data to prove things to yourself and other people in a way it should not.
What skeptical thinking boils down to is the means to construct and to understand a reasoned argument, and, especially important, to recognize a fallacious or fraudulent argument. The question is not whether we like the conclusion that emerges out of a train of reasoning, but whether the conclusion follows from the premise or starting point, and whether that premise is true.
So what is an informal logical fallacy, right? Going back a little bit, a fallacy, before we get to the informal part, is a use of an invalid or otherwise faulty reasoning in the construction of an argument. And it's broken up into two types, formal and informal. All right, a formal fallacy is a flaw in the structure of a deductive argument which renders the argument invalid. So this is sort of if A is B and B is C and C is D, and there's something wrong in that argument in that way. So that's a formal logical fallacy, right? Informal fallacies are used more often, I think. These contain errors in reasoning other than the use of an improper logical form. They're composed of mistakes in reasoning that arise from mishandling of the content of the propositions in your argument. And either type of argument may be deceptive by appearing to be better than it really is, both to yourself and the people you're telling it to. So we're going to go through a few of these. more common ones. And many of these apply to, again, all aspects of people's lives and world. The examples I'm going to show mostly have to do with the religious context. So use of anecdotal evidence is a big one. Tendency to attribute unwarranted credibility to our own observations or to testimony of individuals we know and trust, all of which is subject to what we already talked about, confirmation bias. And I have an example of each of these, and it's going to be read by my nice friendly AI Siri.
Scientists say that empirical research proves that prayer has no noticeable effects. But I know that God answers my prayers because it happens every single day. Plus, others from my temple tell me God answers their prayers too.
Right, so that's a common one. And of course, anecdotal evidence is used in people who believe that alternative medicine treatments work. Hey, acupuncture cured me of this, or homeopathic, pills I took fixed whatever, all sorts of things. Appeal to popularity is an argument that concludes a proposition must be true because many or most people believe it. Let's hear an example.
Christianity is the most popular religion on earth with billions of followers, so it must be true.
I have heard that tons of times for multiple religions. Appeal to tradition, an argument which makes the claim that something is true or beneficial simply because it has been believed or practiced for a long time.
Hinduism is the oldest religion and has been around for thousands of years, so it must be the one true faith.
So I actually had both the argument from popularity and appeal to tradition thrown in at me at one sentence by a friend who was a Christian, trying to tell me why Christianity has to be true. And it was something like, billions of people have believed it for thousands of years, so how could it be wrong? So she made two logical fallacies without realizing it at all. And to her, those were good arguments for believing something. Appeal to authority. This is an argument which grounds a claim in the belief that the source, in a source that is not authoritative, all right? And that source may be non-authoritative for many reasons, including having no expertise in the relevant field, or they may be at odds with the scientific consensus in their field.
Our minister preaches that the only way to beat cancer is to be healed by the Spirit of God. He has a master's of divinity, so I'm stopping my chemotherapy.
And that would clearly be the first case. But there are, in the pandemic especially, there are often cases of the second part where you have an outlying person with a degree in something. They're an MD. They may even have some sort of a degree in virology, but they've come to the conclusion that is totally different from the entire consensus in the field that, about COVID, about vaccines or whatever. And those people are jumped on by people who don't believe in what public health measures are being presented by our government or other governments around the world. They're seen as the authority. They're actually the fringe elements who are demonstrably wrong, but they're the ones who are appealed to as authority. I actually have a friend who sent me some documents her mother sent her. Her mother is an anti-vaxxer, will not get the COVID vaccine, and on top of that, sent an email to all of her family saying, if any in the family get vaccinated, you're no longer welcome in my house ever, because the vaccine will cause me to get me COVID. And attached to this was links to Simone Gold, Dr. Simone Gold, and America's Frontline Doctors, who's an organization run by Simone Gold, who proclaim all of that nonsense, that vaccines for COVID shed the virus and they give it to people and that sort of thing. And by the way, both of those organizations, at that organization and the person, Simone Gold and America's Frontline Doctors, have Wikipedia pages thanks to Guerrilla Skeptics. So all the correct information that these people are, I'll be nice and say fringe, is on Wikipedia. But when people find their own websites, they believe what they have to say because of the appeal to authority, which is sad. So another logical fallacy is the argument from ignorance. That is an argument that assumes a conclusion based primarily on the lack of evidence of the contrary.
No one can actually prove that God exists. Therefore, God does not exist.
So that would be the atheistic argument from ignorance, right? More often I'll hear the opposite, which is that no one can actually prove that God does not exist, therefore God does exist. But in either case, it's the same logical fallacy. Sort of connected with that is the argument from personal incredulity. That's a special case, again, of the argument from ignorance. And it's the fallacy of concluding that because you can't understand or believe something, then it can't be true.
It makes no sense that something as complex as the brain could have evolved. Therefore, an intelligent designer must have made it.
Yeah, so I would say, going back to the Mandela effect, if anyone's listening from that group, it makes no sense that I could be remembering something so badly. So therefore, yeah, there are alternate universes and other explanations for these things, because I can't be wrong, is part of that. Shifting the burden of proof, right? This is a special case, again, of the argument from ignorance. This is a fallacy of putting the burden of proof on the person who denies or questions the assertion being made. I'm stuck on the Mandela effect. Prove to me that it's not alternate universes that's causing these memory problems.
I believe there's a shiny teapot, too small to be detected, orbiting the sun, between Earth and Mars. Because you can't prove this wrong, you must agree that the teapot is there.
So that formulation is known as Russell's teapot by philosopher Bertrand Russell. And, you know, of course, he was arguing that in relation to the statement that you have to believe in God. Because, you know, I believe it's there. I know you can't detect it, but because you can't prove it's not there, you got to believe it. And this happened to me recently. I was editing the page of a conspiratorialist named David Paulides. He made up a conspiracy all by himself named Missing 411, which you can see in the table of contents in the lower left. And he has written, I think it's 10 books at this point on the subject. He believes that people disappear from national parks and elsewhere under mysterious circumstances. He doesn't say why, but he makes a bunch of like insinuations. And his followers believe they're alien abductions or literally trans-dimensional Bigfoots. You know, it could be any, maybe alternate realities and portals they fall into. But the way his Wikipedia article was written, there's a lot of criticism on it, thanks to the guerrilla skeptics. And this summary, which is called the lead of the article above the table of contents, summarizes the criticism in the article as Paulides attributes mysterious unspecified causes to these disappearances, while data analysis suggests that these disappearances are not statistically mysterious or even unexpected. His followers don't like this. They're very aware of the Wikipedia article and they're constantly trying to make changes to it. So one of his friends or fans went in and added, these analysts don't provide any prods, I think that's proofs, that the missing persons have not gone under normal circumstances. I think there's a double negative, which is just wrong. Oh, the whole edit's awful. But what they basically meant was, you can't prove David Paulides is wrong, so he's right. And, you know, of course, it went back to the original form of the article. Circular reasoning. This fallacy is also called begging the question. You might hear that a lot. That's just begging the question. This occurs when the conclusion of an article is used to support the premise without any other evidence being presented in the argument.
The Bible is true because it says it is. It's all right there in the Holy Scriptures. How can you not see that?
Yeah, that comes up a lot on callers to certain talk shows. Appeal to consequences. This fallacy concludes that a belief is either true or false based on whether it leads to a stated desirable or undesirable consequence.
If evolution is true, it means we are just like dirty apes. What a horrible thought. So I believe mankind was specially created by God in his own image.
And the straw man fallacy occurs when someone gives the impression of successfully refuting an argument while they actually are misinterpreting the position, right? And one who does this is said to be attacking a straw man, kind of like a scarecrow. If you're doing bayonet practice, you might put scarecrow in a field. And of course, they can't fight back. So it's a weak version of an actual opponent. It's a straw man.
The theory of evolution is wrong, because all life on Earth could not have come about by random chance. It would be like a tornado going through a junkyard and assembling a working 747.
I actually had a theist friend who told me that word for word, and I've heard other people say that same phrase on call-in shows. So it must be something preached from the pulpit. And there's a lot wrong with it, right? maybe we can talk about in Q&A if people want to talk about what's wrong with that statement. But one big thing is evolution is not just random chance. Appeal to emotion. This is characterized by the manipulation of emotion in order to win an argument or prove your point, right? Especially if you have no other valid evidence to present.
Think of all the children without faith. They must be miserable. How can their lives have any meaning? You must raise them to believe in Jehovah.
And we skipped the part where we'll have to show some kind of proof that actually their lives are miserable without faith and they have no meaning. So I've avoided the Latin terms for these fallacies. Many of them have Latin terms. This one I absolutely love, and everyone should memorize it. Post hoc ergo propter hoc. That's Latin for after this, therefore, because of this. I like the Latin better. It's a fallacious argument that asserts that because two events occurred in succession, the first event was the cause of the second.
I prayed for a new job, and then the next week I saw a posting for one. Less than a month later, I am employed. Allahu Akbar.
I can't tell you how many times I've heard this, especially on the recovering from religion line, is people talking about signs. They asked for a sign, they got some sign. Non sequitur. This is just, it does not follow, right? And one commits this fallacy when what is presented as a conclusion does not logically follow from the premise. Frankly, most informal logical fallacies are varieties of this one. It just doesn't follow.
Believing in Jesus makes me feel good, so I know that he died for my sins and is the prophesied savior.
That one's got more of a disconnect than the others even. Just because I feel good, I know it's true. Then there's the false dichotomy, right? This is an argument in which just two choices are presented as being the only possibilities for the argument. In fact, when there are one or more additional options.
A rational person should live as though God exists. If God does not exist, such a person will have only a finite loss, some pleasures, etc. Whereas if God does exist, they stand to receive infinite gains, and they avoid infinite losses.
So that's the formal presentation of what's called Pascal's wager from French theologian Blaise Pascal, right? And it kind of amazes there's a lot wrong with that argument, but being a Christian, Blaise could not see his flaws. And it really is curious to me that sitcom writers can easily see the flaws.
Tell it, Daddy.
And what if we pick the wrong religion? Every week we're just making God madder and madder.
Testify.
Clearly, Marge is a Blaise Pascal fan and only thinks there's Yahweh or no Yahweh. All right, so in conclusion, what I hope you got from this presentation, here's a summary, is that due to our flawed senses, computational limitations, less than perfect memory, what you think you remember experience must always be suspect, right? And this is also true for claims made by other people. It's especially true for what would be called extraordinary claims, those which contradict what science has uncovered about the nature of reality as we currently understand it. Our natural thinking process is flawed in many ways. It's heavily influenced by cognitive biases. It's subject to fallacious reasoning. But by understanding these things, we can inoculate ourselves from harm, right? Understanding our fallibilities and altering those that we can by critically thinking will lead to holding true beliefs and to making better decisions. I'm going to leave with a few words from Carl Sagan's final televised interview.
Science is more than a body of knowledge. It's a way of thinking, a way of skeptically interrogating the universe with a fine understanding of human fallibility. If we are not able to ask skeptical questions, to interrogate those who tell us that something is true, to be skeptical of those in authority, then we're up for grabs for the next charlatan, political or religious, who comes ambling along.
Political or religious, or in the medical arena. Thank you very much for your attention. And you can follow me on Facebook, as I mentioned. If you've got a smartphone, you can just snap that from the screen. And that'll bring you directly to my Facebook page. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And we're going to do this bit of Q&A now. I believe that I've enabled people to unmute themselves. Linda, you want to try and unmute yourself and see if that works? It is not working for you. Okay.
Yes, it's working. I can talk.
Okay. Very good. All right. So the crowd size is just on the hairy edge of being amenable to real natural participation. So I think we'll try just natural participation. Do try and mute yourself again after you're done speaking, but we'll try natural participation, and then if that's not working so well, we'll try something else.
So by the way, if anyone wrote anything into the chat, I did not have the chat open when I was presenting, so forgive me, but I didn't see it. Maybe you can look back over it later, but.
Yeah, there was quite a bit of activity in the chat, and there were some people who had comments or said they wanted to ask a question. So hopefully they get their chance to bring it verbally to our attention now.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was wondering, Rob, if you saw if you saw the 60 Minutes show on UFOs and what you thought of that show, because I was like kind of shocked that 60 Minutes would make a show like that with personal testimonies, and I could only watch a few minutes and I turned it off. But I was just wondering if you saw it and what you thought of it.
I did not see that one, but I saw a lot of the reporting at the time. Go ahead, Eric. What were you saying?
I was going to ask whether this was a recent 60 Minutes show or
yes.
Yeah,
yes, it was
coincident with the U.S.
ago.
government report, right?
Oh, yes.
Right, like about 2 months ago, this became a big.
Yeah, about 2 months ago. Yeah.
So ABC, CBS, NBC, like all of the major networks ran some kind of story on it. I actually caught a lot of them. If not the first time, people sent me, the links, because a friend of mine and ours in the skeptical community was the expert from the skeptical world who was being interviewed on the shows, but he was given a few seconds compared to the people giving their testimony. His name is Mick West. He's got a site named Metabunk. He has a podcast called Tales from the Rabbit Hole. He's got a book called Escaping the Rabbit Hole, and it's all about people who believe in conspiracy theories and how to understand them and maybe help them get out of them. It's very fascinating. But one of the things he's done recently, because he's a pilot and he's got video expertise, is he analyzed the leaked videos and then officially released videos from the US Navy and, gave his opinion on them. And there's still nothing there. And it is quite incredible that, he gets called on, he gives his word, and then they just ignore what he says. In fact, then the next report on the same station will show the videos ooh, how do we possibly explain these pyramid UFOs? And he just talked about it and explained what they were, their camera to aperture problems. It's they want to be, they're going for clicks, they're going for views. They don't care about the truth, unfortunately. It's very unfortunate.
It's not the first time that 60 Minutes has used their credibility to. I saw an older 60 Minutes where they took on another topic that science has clarified, and I forget what the topic was, I'm sorry, but it was an older 60 Minutes where they really put themselves in trouble, I think, to mess with people, I think. For me, it's trouble when they do that.
So Leland, I don't know if it was Trump, but actually somebody from the other side of the aisle started all of this, right? Harry Reid, he's a big ufologist. His friends are all ufologists, well placed in the industry, and he procured tens of millions of dollars for the U.S. government to study this, and that is what is now continuing. That's where this report came from. And the same people who were ufologists in the 70s, have now made careers on U.S. government dollars. And the report, because it was ambiguous, is just going to, put further millions of dollars into this nonsense.
There's one more thing I want to say, and if anybody else can talk, but there's an interesting book called the gray lady died or something like that, about the New York Times and how they did not do any reporting about what was happening to the Jewish people in the Holocaust. And these were Jewish people that were running the New York Times. And it was a very shameful thing, but this was like the big thing, and they just refused to write as many articles as maybe one, maybe two. Millions of people died, and they didn't report it at all.
Of less significance, but maybe also quite amazing, is that the New York Times, when Robert Goddard was doing his rocket tests, ran an editorial that Robert Goddard doesn't know what he's talking about because no rocket can work in space. Don't you know Newton's laws? And they finally apologized, the New York Times did, for that when the first Apollo mission landed on the moon.
The whole UFO study, the whole UFO study thing does have two sort of useful aspects to it. One is it does get people looking for things that could be novel technologies, either developed by individuals here or developed by other countries being deployed in the United States. And so they are sort of a reserve army of people looking, and so they can be useful to the rest of society in detecting things. And obviously a lot of it will be, seeing Venus or seeing a
unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be the case. All of these cases, to some technology we don't understand, and then you hear these guys go, well, it's like the other countries have jumped 2 or 3 generations of technology ahead of us. Okay, let's use Occam's razor here, right? Is that possible with spies that we have and things like that? Or is this an error of observation or judgment, right? And then again, Mick West, one of the primary ones where he's showing the pilots go, whoa, that's going Mach 55, that's impossible. He shows angularly when a plane passes something that's close to it and it's looking at it past something further away, it looks like it's moving at super speed next to it. But they keep presenting it like the only explanation is this is either an alien or other countries' high technology. No, you're just misinterpreting the facts.
Right. And I guess the other thing that it's providing is just a series of examples of how people can misinterpret things, and then you can analyze that. And the people that look, there are a lot of people who really are trying to be, some trying harder than others, trying to be objective, and yet they're still
I agree,
falling for conclusions that are totally unreasonable.
Yeah, and to get back to some of the content of my presentation, often what you'll hear is they're a pilot. They have to know what they saw, right? We have to believe them. That's an argument from authority. No, pilots still have human brains and eyes, right? They're not trained specially to sight UFOs, and they make just as many errors as the average everyday person does. But people make this bizarre assumption that they have faculties above human norms because they're a pilot of an aircraft.
So let me throw out another thing. One of the things that we often say, particularly when we talk about, say, climate science, or you were also saying, as you were talking about somebody who's on the fringes of the scientific community versus the scientific consensus, we do make appeals to, quote, the scientific consensus, and we do, because it's difficult to evaluate the primary research results. We rely on the mediation of experts in the field, and yet that's also a shortcut. It may be a necessary shortcut in some cases, but it's still a shortcut in reasoning.
Well, so there's a statement, and I forget who said this, but it's something close to, science is what we have taught ourselves so that we stop fooling ourselves. And it's the best we have. Yeah, they might not, it's not perfect. It's another human endeavor, but it is the best we have. Yeah, people are pointing out that there are hands raised.
Yes, I'm noticing that too. Christopher, if you want to.
Hello, Randall had his hand first, but I'm very happy to go ahead if he's all right with it.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, I guess
we'll
Zoom
get-
is
we'll get
showing
Ryan.
it from left to right on my screen. Yeah, then it would be Randall, Christopher, and Dan, if that's
Okay.
correct.
Oh, okay. Oh, do you want to go in that order? We can do that. Okay, Randall, you want to go?
Yes, I'd prefer to start first because I think it would be a good leaping off point for everybody else. First of all, I should introduce myself as a Mandela affected, but I would like to point out a couple of things that are on my mind and also reflect what you have been talking about. You brought up the VW emblem and the Toyota emblem as being false memories, and I would like to correct that because my stepfather used to own a scrapyard. The VW emblem is joined between the V and the W, but that was specifically for 1 year. I believe it was 76. And also there's the issue of the V and the W being separated in many photos, but the separator, the black, the black portion is not included, or it's not included enough, or it's very thin, or it's faded out. So a lot of people will interpret that as being joined. So that's where some of that confusion is coming in place, is because some people will see the old, I believe it's, this, as I said, the 76 emblem, and they'll think, oh, look, it used to be, but now due to a alternate universe, it's separated.
So would the Mandela effect believe that all of those were correct in an alternate universe, that there were 16 alternate universes where those were different versions?
Yeah, also with the Toyota, very long time ago, back before I was.
Wait, Randall, you didn't answer my question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So would people who believe in this effect believe that there were 16 versions of the universe where each of those was correct and people were just not wrong in any of those drawings?
I believe that there's like only 2 different versions of, or 2 different groups that say it used to be that way.
That's still not my question. So the point of this slide was that people don't remember anything, even if it's something they see a lot in good detail. And you're giving kind of an explanation for one version of this, maybe, but like this is like, there's probably, this is just one slide. There are hundreds of people and everyone draws it differently.
Oh, I see.
You see?
Yeah, I really don't know. All I know is that a lot of people are saying, oh no, it used to be joined together.
Yeah, okay. So, but still, unless there's like, you're saying there's hundreds of versions of it and hundreds of versions of reality, still somebody's wrong, right? So the main point of this is that our memory, like, no dollar bill ever looked like that, I'm pretty much sure, right? So it's just that people don't remember things properly. What's the point of this part of the presentation?
Yeah, my understanding of the VW issue is that people said that it used to be connected and now it is no longer. With the Toyota, an old version back 1970 before, something like that, it used to be a T. It used to be a T, and then they updated it, and that's a perfect example of branding. For instance, it happened with Fruit Loops. It used to be Fruit Loops, F-R-U-I-T, but there was an issue because there is no fruit in it. There's only lemongrass, and they lost a lawsuit, changed it, and quite a few times you will see in old sitcom episodes or whatever, it will show F-R-U-I-T, and yet it's been changed to the double O. And so people will say, oh, alternate universe, and that's not the case.
All right, that makes sense. So by the way, I need to say, by the way, I'm here to 12:30 hard stop. Just
Yeah,
so.
no, I want to keep this.
Well, I didn't tell Eric that either, but yeah, I didn't know we were going to go this long.
Yeah. So if you don't mind, we'll try and get to a couple other people, but
I do want to bring up one point, and that is that I saw the Tank Man, and I watched that very carefully when they were doing the episode, and they had 2 women, 1 man showing the film. And just before he was, quote, run over, they stopped the film and then had the 2 women go histrionic. Oh my God, I think they're going to run over him. Oh my goodness, they're going to run over him. And quite often I will hear people say that they did run over the Tiananmen tank man. And I think what's happened is that memory has been created because of the histrionics of those two women going on and on about the fact that they expect that. And that's one of the things that really upsets me about the Mandela effect community, is this willingness to go along with the created effect. But anyway, I had some other things to say, but I will let you guys.
This might be interesting to do a whole talk just on that, by the way. We just touched on it, Eric.
Yeah.
I'll let
All
you
right.
move on. But
So-
thank you
so-
for hearing me out.
So let's go to Christopher.
Hello, thanks for having me. Sorry, I can't have my video on. I got aware of this talk through your Facebook page. Thank you for that. And here's a question I'd like to pose. You've spoken a lot about how people go wrong from the logical fallacies front, but we know that people respond quite poorly to being told they're wrong, especially after they've been involved with misinformation as opposed to before. What is the next step from the action point of view? So I know you're doing what you're doing is mostly education to people already interested in the topic. What's the next step? Is it education from a younger age? Is it policy and social media and YouTube regulation? Is it working on trust in marginalized communities? Or in that vein, I guess, if the skeptic movement is focused on unpicking the rational and fallacious arguments, what other sectors in society is best complemented by to implement a more kind of synergistic change, I suppose? And I'm asking as sorry, if I may, I'm asking as a student who is at Cambridge University in the UK, who's recently set up a new initiative specifically focused on tackling misinformation.
Oh, cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, I think everything you mentioned is important. I do a presentation on the harm in believing in psychics, and one of the points I make there is a quote attributed to Mark Twain, is that it's easier to fool somebody than it is to convince them, once they've been fooled, that they have been fooled. And so, yeah, the part you mentioned about early education and critical thinking, I mentioned in that presentation, is very important. It's not, we shouldn't just be teaching, what we know, what science has found, but how we've arrived at those conclusions. And we should have courses on this sort of thing, critical thinking, all the places which we don't. It is very hard. I mean, I have personal friends who are deep into this stuff, and it's very hard to get them out of it. The person I mentioned, Mick West's book and his podcast are devoted to helping people, convince people who are already into this. But there are all these forces that once you're into that sort of a thing, part of it was the biases I talked about, that you don't want to get out. If you've seen the documentary Behind the Curve, flat earth belief, it has become a religion to these people. And it has all the drawbacks of a religion, of a cult, in that, like, if you've been raised as a kid, there was one in the documentary, I believe, or it might have been someone else, I saw this, a father and wife raised their kid as a flat earther. And then he gets older and he starts reading stuff and no, this is not right. The earth is a sphere. He's like kicked out of the house. Like, you can't live here if you're a flat earther. Where else does that happen but religion? And because the people who believe it now have a community, they have motivated reasoning to stay in the community. They have the confirmation bias. They won't look at anything else. And they'll lose their support structure, all their friends, all the online social groups they're in, if they change their mind. So they don't. But yeah, so I don't know what all the answers to that, but certainly skeptics are trying to fight the battle. And one of the worst places we see it affecting the modern world is the large number of people who believe, in the bad information about vaccination against COVID out there.
Absolutely, thank you so much. We've had talks before from Professor Karen Douglas about the psychological factors that predispose someone to conspiracy theory, and also Dr. Carol Chavez on cognitive dissonance and fake memories, as exactly as you said. So it's really nice to have that affirmed. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
So I guess let's move to Dan, and then I'll go to Lois.
Hi, I'd like to just, I guess, share a couple of thoughts, and I'll try to keep them as concise as I can. But a question was raised earlier about perhaps even in the scientific community, you see logical fallacies, like, for example, appealing to, well, this is what most of science believes, so let's just assume that. And I think my answer to that would be like, of course there's fallacies, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're black and white. If a large number of people believe something, that is enough evidence to believe that maybe there's something to that. But I think understanding the potential fallacy is what protects you from saying, okay, that might be true. However, that's not good enough for me as evidence. So if I find something contradictory, you don't stop and say, well, that's not what everybody believes. So anyway, that's my little input about that.
Yeah, I'd almost say that anytime you just are believing something because a lot of people believe it, you're likely to be wrong. In fact, I mean, I used to have a whiteboard up at work, which was just things everyone believes that are wrong, and the list is endless. I mean, ostriches put their head in the sand to hide from predators, lemmings fall off a cliff, sugar causes children to become hyperactive. I mean, the list is endless in all sorts of fields, and you'll find the majority of people believing all of those things. It's just not a good way to understand reality.
I guess I can't disagree with that. The other thing I want to comment on is what's difficult in terms of understanding logical fallacies and problems with memory. I mean, those are things one can apply to themselves, but it's almost a losing battle to try to use it on somebody else or some other, because people are emotional and they're going to believe what they want to. And in my experience, I have found my way out of a fundamentalist Christian religion. And I was well aware that there were lots of mental gymnastics that I was using to uphold my faith. And that was problematic for me. But I had a lot of emotional investment to say, well, I understand the reasoning might be flawed, but if I really believe this is the way it is, I can't help that it looks bad. So that wouldn't deter me. But only once I got to a place where I was crossroads in life, was it worth to me to actually realize, now hold on, if I have to do all these mental gymnastics to keep believing something, I had to be at a point where it was worth it to me to be deeply intellectually honest with myself. And that's something that people have to come to on their own.
Yeah. A lot of people who call the Recovering from Religion helpline, I have this conversation with. It's like, I almost hate when people say you can.
The more people who can be educated on fallacious thinking and stuff, the more helpful it can be. But to the extent of people who are willing and ready to use those tools have the ability to do so.
I mean, you can break people into two groups. I often hate doing that, but in this case, I'm going to do it anyway. There are people who are happy believing what they want to believe, and they don't want to think about it any more than that. And there are people who want to know the truth, right? And once they start having doubts, they pursue that. And if you're arguing with a person on the side of, I'm happy believing what I want to believe, there is almost no point in it. But it's hard to know, and of course, it's not that black and white. There's a gray scale. And it's hard to know where a person is. And sometimes leaving breadcrumbs, enough of them they get, occasionally will, flip the switch and they'll start actually questioning what they believe to try to find the truth. But it's hard. And you and someone else made the comment about, so here are the names of logical fallacies. And when you're arguing something, it's bad form to say, oh, that's the logical fallacy from, don't do that. Because that just, you're a show off, and then that just makes them dig their heels in more. But it's more to understand when you hear someone making an argument why you shouldn't buy it, and also that you should not do it yourself. That's a big one. Don't fall into the trap of doing any of these things yourself. But if you are talking to someone who has a belief based upon those fallacies or biases, you can understand where they're coming from and maybe discuss it from the standpoint without throwing the names of those things out there. And there's a thing called street epistemology. I don't know if this group has ever talked about that. That's a technique for having normally confrontational discussions about a confrontational topic, which are hopefully not confrontational. It's called street epistemology. You can Google that. One of the well-known practitioners of it is Anthony Magnabosco. And he interviews people on college quads and state parks about like their religious beliefs. And he does it in such a way that it's a polite questioning using the Socratic method. And that's a good way to discuss things with people if they're open to it. You know, he'll start the conversation with, all right, let's talk about this topic. Pick something you firmly believe in that's important to you. How confident are you it's true? Almost everyone says 100%. You know, my personal savior is Jesus Christ, died for me, 100%. And then literally 10 minutes of questioning, polite questioning about why they believe this. And then they say something, why do you believe that? Then, okay, thanks for the interview. Have you changed your confidence at all? That could be down to 70% in 10 minutes. It's like that sometimes astonishes me that's clearly this person never thought about why they believe what they believe. And maybe that's not the end of the process for that person. You know, realizing this, they may go towards the, you know, the other side of it at some point.
Thanks. And if I may add one other thing, one thing that helped me a lot is something I don't remember who came up with it, but it's called the bite model.
Yeah, that's Stephen Hassan.
Yeah. So I don't think being aware of like fallacies alone would have done a whole lot for me. But when I came across that, being able to identify, am I in a situation where my willingness to go against logic is being influenced by behavior control or thought control or things like that. That helped me see a lot more red flags. And so I know that's a little bit off topic, but I feel like there's a correlation there where certain groups of people might be more impervious to considering, I don't know, logical fallacy. But if they can see the signs of like, this is why you're in that context. And again, I mean, that depends on people's emotional willingness and readiness. But I want to make the connection because I found that that's been extremely helpful for me to get a frame of reference.
I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, so RFR is actually in conversation with Stephen Hassan's manager so that he can do a presentation for recovering from religion. It might happen sometime in the period of like a month from now. And he will definitely be talking about the bite model. So people who don't know, Stephen Hassan was a Moonie and escaped the cult, and now he works heavily to deprogram people, has written several books on cults, including his latest, The Cult of Trump. He's got a Wikipedia article, you can look him up.
All right, I want to move on to Lois. Lois, you just muted yourself rather than you would hit.
Right, I saw that. Thank you very much. Two relatively quick questions. One is of an ethical nature, the other is not. When you spoke about color, I was very intrigued by your descriptions of the color that we see and the colors that we don't see. And have people done research into some artists like a Van Gogh who paints in colors that people never thought about painting in? Is it because he had enhanced perception of color because of his optical makeup?
Good question, Lois. I don't know. I wish I did. Actually went to both of the touring exhibits of Van Gogh within the last month. Immersive Van Gogh and the Van Gogh Immersive Experience, slightly different names. They sound similar, but yeah. But that didn't come up, and I didn't know about that. No, sorry, don't know.
Okay, well, then moving on to my ethical question. A few days ago, I was supposed to attend a meeting. I'll just call it a political meeting. And a friend of mine was also scheduled, but she was coming to dinner at my home. So she brought her computer so she could leave it on and it would be muted and the video would be stopped so that the people who were presenting would see more people in attendance. Now, I know in theater, they call this papering the house, where you give away free tickets just before the play opens. So it will look as if a lot of people came to see the production. And I thought that was unethical, that she wanted to pretend she was in the audience so they could have larger numbers. And it's only possible with Zoom. And I thought it was clever, but unethical. And I wondered, was she kidding herself, or was she just, what do you see that?
I don't know. It's an interesting. Now I'm wondering if the 30 or so people who were here, duplicate accounts that Eric set up, Leland set up. I don't know. I don't know.
It's
I mean,
kind of like,
and people do that all the time, but that's okay.
I'm not here. I'm not here.
it's technology and ethics. I don't think it's ethical to do that. You're just fooling the presenter.
It's interesting, but yeah, it's certainly an extrapolation of, I mean, I'm sure, Hollywood, not Hollywood, Broadway plays do this, especially when they're opening and there's not enough people yet, they'll probably give out tickets and
They do.
yeah, that has to, there's probably TV shows that film with a live audience that give away free tickets to do this. Yeah, it's just technology extrapolating on what used to just be done in real life. So it doesn't surprise me.
Does it fit into any of the categories that you gave as kind of thinking she was doing something noble by adding her name to the participants, and I just saw it as unethical?
I suppose maybe motivated reasoning.
Okay.
Yeah, she's, the consequences, there's one where, of course, the consequences are the most important part of it, right? Appeal to consequences, I think it is. So that's kind of like the end justifies the means in practice.
Right.
Whatever she was doing that, whatever the reason was, is a really good reason. Therefore, people who portray themselves as extremely fundamentalist Christians and do not lie is one of the 10 commandments, and they'll lie for Jesus because, saving people's souls is more important than them lying. So yeah, people are like that.
Thank you.
Let's see.
Oh, so I just got an update on my status time. I can stay for about 10 more minutes.
Oh, okay.
Well, I wanted to, that extraordinary claims thing. I saw a really funny thing. Hemant Mehta, he's that friendly atheist guy. He said, well, actually, you don't always need extraordinary evidence. You just need a little bit of evidence. Sometimes, not always extraordinary.
Yeah, and I bring it back to the
Just
UFO.
any evidence.
Well, so like the UFO thing, right? So the claim is it's either aliens, extraterrestrials who are visiting constantly the Earth. There was actually God on one of those things. I don't remember if it was ABC or CNN, but there was a pilot being, this is seen by pilots every single day. Wow, that's not even like rare then. Like if it's that common, then how come we don't know about this? That was just ridiculous. But yeah, regarding the UFO thing, like they don't have extraordinary evidence, and the claim is extraordinary. It's either extraterrestrials visiting this planet on a constant basis, or our competitors in the sphere of global influence have jumped ahead of us by science fiction technology, or people make mistakes. Use Occam's razor. Yeah, so there's another formulation to answer the chat, who decides what claims are extraordinary. Right, of it basically that the amount of evidence needs to be proportional to the claim. So therefore you sort of don't use the word extraordinary, but it's like, if I tell you what I had for lunch, you asked me what I had for lunch, I had a bologna sandwich. Okay, I might be lying to you, but if I am, what's the difference? If you accept it, it doesn't change anything in your worldview, right? But however, if you ask me what I had for lunch and I said, oh, aliens beamed me up to their spacecraft and we had some special thing from Alpha Centauri, I think you shouldn't just say, okay, the same way you said when I just said I had a bologna sandwich, right? You would need more evidence. And me saying so is not equivalent to when I said, yes, I had a bologna sandwich. So that's the problem. And these days, and you have to figure it out, right? I take a photograph and show it to you. Well, anyone could fake anything in a photograph. These days of video, there's deep fakes can be fakes. That's not even good enough. It has to be proportional to the claim you're making. That's the point.
Yeah, and sometimes the claims are not even all that extraordinary, but they are important. Like the claim, I have been vaccinated, and here's my card. Is the card, or right, do you need to be more skeptical of the card because you know there are fakes circulating around? And there's all
absolutely true.
These lines that you have to draw when you're
Right.
trying to make policy for an organization, or even when you're just trying to navigate the world as an individual. You're always making these judgments of, okay, what's the probability that somebody's trying to pull a fast one on me? What's the probability that they themselves are deluded and they believe it, but they're still wrong?
Right. And what's the harm if I make the
And
wrong
what's
assumption?
the harm if
Right.
if I don't get this right?
Right.
And so I think the idea is if the harm of not getting it right is significant, then the effort that you would make to make sure that you're not going off in the wrong direction has to be a lot more effort.
Yep, totally agree.
Diligence. That's why it's due diligence. It's not a constant amount of diligence. It's due to, it's whatever's appropriate to the situation.
Right. I mean, you don't let
Trying to
people
make
get
that
on an
situation.
airplane just by flashing a passport, right? They take your passport and they look it up in their system to see if it matches what's already in some database that they control, right? Right. So we have this for the vaccinations, but apparently no one's using it, right? I have it on my phone from New Jersey. I can flash it at somebody. It's from their app, and I didn't put the information, and I just put my social security number, and it went to their database where I got vaccinated and shows what vaccinations I've had. Now, of course, if someone's just going to take that, and if I show it on the screen, you can just Photoshop that, right? So unless the person who's interrogating the person has the ability to interrogate the database themselves, much like a passport agent, right? You just don't believe what someone shows you. But again, how difficult would that be for every single thing? Can you imagine everyone going into Madison Square Garden and some agent having to look it up? You know how long it takes to get to passport security at an airport? It becomes virtually impossible to fill the stadium in time. I don't know how we're ever going to achieve this.
If I may, two very quick observations and then a question. The first is, and without any proof at all, I think the flat Earth movement is just a con to give people a reason to go to Las Vegas.
Yeah, well, so that's not true. That is not true. I know people. Did you know the people in the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe?
Again?
Do you know this podcast, The Skeptic's Guide to the Universe?
No, I do not.
Oh, it's like the preeminent science and skepticism podcast. Definitely everyone should look that up. They also wrote a book,
Okay.
same
All
name,
right.
Skeptic. Anyway, these are 5 skeptics who run skeptical organizations, have millions of followers. Three of the 5 people on it are brothers. Their sister is a flat earther. She's also a young earth creationist. And she goes to conventions or whatever. Can't say everyone there is true, but you can't also say everyone is false. These people, some of them absolutely believe this.
Okay, the next one is my favorite survivalist bias is if I can do it, anyone can.
Interesting.
I mean, that's pretty much
Yeah.
the same thing.
Because
wouldn't
if
say?
you didn't survive and you're dead, you couldn't make that claim.
Well, I mean, like quit smoking. If I can quit smoking, anyone can quit smoking. Well, no, that's not necessarily true. But, you know.
There's probably another bias with that name. I can't think of it right now, but that's interesting.
But I do have a question. If someone, if you say, you know, the consensus in the medical community is vaccines are effective and they have few side effects, and someone comes back, well, you know, the medical community has been wrong before. I mean, look at when they said that all cholesterol is bad. And then eventually they found out that not all of it is bad. How do you counter that?
Well, it's the same thing I'm hearing, and I just recently saw it, where someone posted on my site when I posted about the VAERS database for vaccine. You know, there's a database where anyone can put anything in that they claim happened after they got vaccinated. Literally, I had a car accident the day after I got a vaccine, and that's in the database, right? But people point to this database as, oh, look, all the bad things happen when you get vaccinated. So there was a comment on my site about, look at this. It started with that. Look at this VAERS database. And also, scientists don't know what they're talking about. First, they told us this, and then you need boosters, then you don't need boosters, and then let's not use this vaccine because it causes blood clots, and now it's okay. And it's a problem because this is an ongoing thing, right? This is not settled. The virus is mutating, how it's spreading in the population is changing. And the people who already have a distrust of science, we're doing the best we can. We have to trust it the way they say now regarding this public health measure. They're just taking, oh, scientists keep lying. I'm not going to believe anything they say ever. And that's just the wrong approach. And as Leland said, yes, understanding evolves, of this especially.
Well, thanks so much, Rob. I know your time is
yeah, Going to a play.
But I really appreciate your talk. We've had a lot of good engagement with this, and we'll be, of course, doing this again next month. And we already have lined up our speaker for next month. We're going to have Darsha Narvaez talk about the evolved nest and all the mistakes that society currently makes in raising children and how to do it better. So that'll be the topic for next.
Interesting. Okay, thank you for having me. See you next time.
Thanks again, Rob.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.